Thank you, everybody, for showing up today, taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to the Arise community. Joe Rosenberg.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. A good friend of a few decades. We won't say how many years exactly we know each other, but it's...
your hair is beginning to show. Mine too.
I'm thankful to have some. And obviously, multiple-time New York Times best-selling author. People know your books. Many people know you for your fictional books. I love your non-fictional books. And you just wrote your last one, Inside the Revolution, was just absolutely amazing. And now you've published this new book, which we have right here, Enemies and Allies, which I can't wait to read. And you've been spending your time going around and meeting presidents, prime ministers, princes, and kings throughout the Middle East to get their perspective on the events that are rolling out, particularly since the Abrahamic Accords. And I know you talk about that in your book, but if you could just give us kind of a macro picture. When we talked last year at this summit, you talked about a potential Middle East gold rush with the disposable resources down in the Gulf states, and of course the amazing Israeli startup scene. What have you seen since then? How's this last year looked? What are some of the big points to orient our crowd towards current events right now?
Well, this is a fascinating, encouraging, exciting season that we don't usually use those words when we talk about the Middle East. We think of the last 100 years. Let's not go back 3,000 or 4,000 years, we can, but the last 100 years, it's been painful, it's been bloody, it's been tense, it's been terror-stricken. But what we're watching with the Abraham Accords are 4 Arab countries breaking away from the view that until the Palestinian leadership is willing to make peace, that nobody can make peace. And the fact that these 4 countries have decided to join Egypt and Jordan in making peace with Israel, but even going further to normalize, that's the term they're using. In fact, the Bahrainis tell me they don't even consider it normalization. They consider it formalization, because in their view, they were not ever at war with Israel. Maybe economic issues and boycotts and stuff, but for a long time they've had a warm relationship. What I talk about in the book, Enemies and Allies, is my opportunity to sit down, with these kings, crown princes, presidents, and prime ministers in the Arab world. I mean, for an Israeli who's also an evangelical, who's also Jewish on my father's side, not on my mom's side, and an American, to be able to sit with and interview for hours and hours and hours the decision makers in this region was amazing. And it's the first and only book so far that takes you inside how did the Abraham Accords come about. Bottom line right now, I would say, the gold rush has started. COVID has caused it to go a little slower at first, but you already have 250,000 Israelis who rushed into the United Arab Emirates just to see it. And business deals are happening, boom, 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 boom. Airlines back and forth. I think we're at the early stages, and I think the Abraham Accords group of countries will expand. I can tell you, talking directly to United Arab Emirates Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed and all of his inner circle, this is a strategic decision that was deep, deep, deep. This is not about keeping one set of armies over here and one set of armies over here. This is about a strategic decision from the UAE side to brand themselves as probably the most progressive, and I say that without cultural or political overtones, just a sense of progress. Like, we're an Arab country that is open for business. We are open for tourism. We've got the World Expo. We brought the Pope. We brought the first ever delegation of evangelicals. We've made peace with Israel. We're going to the moon. That's a lot for a little country that didn't exist 60 years ago. So
I think most of our viewers would agree that it's a miracle.
Yeah.
Really.
And yet the story hasn't yet been told much. And I think this book, and then there's others coming down the pipeline, most of your viewers have not yet, they've heard the terms, they've read some articles, but try to go inside what is really happening. Is it a mindset shift? Because no business leader is going to go make the bet on this unless they believe it's deep and it's real. I believe it is. I explain why in the book, and you've got some great guests here to go even deeper.
Well, let's speak with Flo Hassan Nahum. Thank you for being with us today. I just love your story. Right? Growing up in Gibraltar, from such a special family, having your father, who was the mayor and the first prime minister, I guess, or chief minister of Gibraltar. And Gibraltar is really a crossroad of civilizations in many ways, like Israel and like the Gulf states. And then, so growing up in that whole atmosphere of diplomacy, taking those skills that you learned as a young lady and bring them here to serve Israel and to serve the municipality of Jerusalem and it's almost, you work under so many impressive hats, right?
Thank you, Kevin.
Let's say for a moment that you're let's mention for a moment that you're the deputy mayor of Jerusalem that's responsible for business development. What have you seen in that position which you fulfill since the Abraham Accords as far as potential business that's being developed for Jerusalem and for Israel through these new contacts?
So thank you. It's always wonderful being here. So it's really very interesting, I think, what's happened in the last year and a half, and I agree with everything that you're saying. We're in a new era. We're in an era where it's not the Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. That's over. It's the countries of the Middle East that are for peace and prosperity, and it's the countries that are for radicalism and destruction. That's the new paradigm in the Middle East, and that was really an incredible thing that the United States of America, President Trump and Kushner and his advisors, David Friedman doing it from here, decided not to follow conventional wisdom that hadn't really gotten us very far and say, no, we have to, usher in a new era of countries that actually have common interests. In Jerusalem, I'm also in charge of foreign affairs, tourism, and as you said, economic development. And the moment actually, before the Abraham Accords were declared, my good friend Doron Barak and I, he's a businessman who's been working in the region for many, many years. He's been telling me for a long time, the new frontier for Israel is the Gulf. And I kind of didn't believe him. I mean, Joel, you were there before any of this was happening. But in Israel, most people, that was a no-no. We weren't allowed. You didn't have diplomatic relations. And he said to me, this is the new era for Israel. And then I started speaking to the Friedman people, and I understood that something was cooking. I just didn't understand it was going to get cooked so quickly. So at that point, Doron and I co-founded the UAE Israel Business Council.
That was visionary to do it.
Yes, we didn't realize. We were going to do it in order to kind of prepare the ground for a future peace or normalization. Little did we imagine that the month later, it was going to happen. And within 4 days of it being declared, we had an online platform. Today we have 3,000 people on it who are divided into segments. What business are you interested in? And one of our segments is tourism and delegation, which Esti here runs. You're going to meet in a minute. And basically, we created the first tool for people to start talking to each other, because there was so much excitement. There was so much. This was such a game changer that people were desperate and they didn't know how to connect. And we really have the first mover advantage in that we connected the first business platform for people to connect. And since then, it's just grown. And one of the offshoots of our business platform is a women's leadership forum. We have incredible, illustrious leaders of the Middle East, like our common friend Huda Nunu, and other wonderful women from Bahrain, from the Emirates. And more important than that, when you look at the numbers, is that the whole atmosphere in the Middle East has changed. You look at the numbers for trade between Israel and Jordan. Since the Abraham Accords, it's shot up. Jordan? Why? What's happened? What's changed? I've got women in our business council from Egypt, and they say to me, why did nobody ever think that we could do this Israel-Egypt or Jordan-Egypt? That was a cold peace led by leaders, not led by people. This peace was signed by leaders, but it's very much led by people and by civil society and by business people.
And can I just add one thing on this? I totally agree with you, Fleur. We have often been critical of Jordanian society and Egypt and even the governments at times. I love those leaders. I know them, but have they always done enough to promote this? However, remember, they weren't being validated by anybody in the Arab world. Like, you guys are on your own.
True.
When the Egyptians made peace, the entire Arab League pulled out of Cairo and boycotted Egypt. When Jordan did it, they didn't get any benefits, in particular, from the Arab world. You're on your own.
Yeah.
This is showing a validation, and I think it's going both directions. The warmth that the Emiratis and the Bahrainis particularly are showing is beginning to wake up business leaders and other civic leaders in both countries to say, okay, now maybe the time is to move. We can do more than we used to because we're not alone. I think that's,
Not to
community builds
Absolutely.
community.
And not to mention that it's a different world, a world of fast communication and WhatsApp and Zooms. What we've managed to do in a closed country with COVID, in the first year of the Abraham Accords, because of the fact we're in a different era than we were 40 years ago, communications-wise, is unprecedented.
Well, you talk about a different era, and I think it would be stating the obvious to say that just as impressive as this diplomatic tectonic shift that's taking place, the fact that you can have a forum for leadership of women in the Middle East in such an open and strong way is just amazing. And that's something that's new in and of itself.
It is, and the momentum really is with women in the Middle East. People here and around the world tell me, oh, aren't women totally repressed there? Not at all. They are business leaders, they're political leaders. It's really impressive. And just to answer your previous question about Jerusalem, I see Jerusalem has a very important role to play here. First of all, that I think we're going to be seeing a new era of Muslim tourism that we've never seen, but I think more than that, we have the largest Arab population in the state of Israel, Jerusalem. We have 330,000 Arabs, and I see that the young Arabs, the ones who are going into technology subjects in college, we have a record number of young Arab men and women in Jerusalem colleges and universities, and that embracing them into the startup nation and using them as a bridge and as a hub for R&D, for research and development for the entire Middle East, I think that's a really exciting prospect that I'm trying to push forward.
It sounds like it could even elevate their status and
Absolutely.
importance within the Israeli business ecosystem because of the connection of language and culture and everything that they can connect so easily to.
And they're very excited. Whatever you hear on the news, I've been to Dubai, lots of times in the last year and a half. My flight is
I think that's the first time you and I actually met in person was in Dubai.
Absolutely, we did,
That's
absolutely.
right.
And on my flight, full of Palestinian and Arab-Israeli business people going there because they understand the advantages.
That's so exciting, and we really believe in the Arise community that business is the best place for peaceful coexistence.
100%.
And many times it goes before the political and diplomatic community, and as a kind of like a pioneering group.
Because business does not discriminate.
Right.
It's about the mutual prosperity, and it's about a win-win, and that's a great premise.
And it should be about helping people.
Also,
And religion doesn't come into business. We don't mix business and religion.
Esti Ohana, I'm so glad that you're joining our conversation. And many people from Arise may recognize you from our physical summits that you help to manage under your hat with Keshet Tours. And it's just been so lovely to work with you. You're always somebody, what an amazing person, willing sometimes to be behind the scenes and just get the job done. And that's really what drives business forward. And I was thinking, when COVID hit, oh my God, what's going to happen with Esti? I mean, her whole life is based on business. And the next thing you know, you're going back and forth to the Gulf States and to Dubai and creating delegations and working with Flo, with the Women's Empowerment Forum. It's wonderful. But at the same time, I know that working in tourism is painful right now, isn't it? So what's happening right now in tourism in Israel and the Middle East from kind of like a macro perspective?
So first of all, it's always a pleasure to be part of Arise and to meet you, Kalev. And it's a pleasure working with you. Tourism has been shut, for Israel at least, incoming tourism from around the world to Israel has been shut for the last over a year and a half. And we've, the borders of Israel have been shut and no tourists have been allowed in. And all of our Christian friends from around the world who have really wanted to come here have not been able to come. And that's been very sad for both us and for them. I think the main tourism that we've been seeing in the last year and a half has been outgoing tourism of Israelis going to the UAE and Bahrain. In the last, as my friends here said, in the last year, we've had 250,000 Israelis going from Israel to the UAE, and it's amazing. It's amazing for the economy, the UAE economy, and it's just been amazing because it's been a country that was not allowed for Jews to enter, for Israelis to enter. I've been going back and forth to the UAE since I think 2017, 2018, with delegations from the US and Europe. And for me, it was like a very different change to start working with Israelis, not foreigners. It's very different. and bringing Israelis from here to there. So that's been my switch. And I've also been working a little bit with delegations, more formal delegations from the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and even Egypt to Israel in the last few months. But they've been very, very formal and very, it's not like the masses coming in, which we're looking forward to having. And just seeing Israel meeting the people, with their kanduras and their dress and understanding these are from the Arab Emirates, and they became celebs. They walked down the streets and everybody was taking photos with them because of their dress, and they're like, wow, this is something amazing and different. So it was really, for me, it was like an understanding, and it's an opening to a new era, like everybody's talking about, this new era that's going to happen soon, and we're going to see more and more people with kanduras walking around the streets of Jerusalem and around the country, and that's going to be amazing.
Well, from your mouth to God's ear. Now you mentioned Morocco for a second. I want to talk about Morocco because we've talked a lot about this. Both of you and then some of our other interviewees today are part of the UAE Israel Business Council. It's a long name.
We call it UIBC.
UIBC,
Right.
UIBCA. So they're part of UIBCA. Now, and we haven't talked about Morocco that much at all. What would you say from a business or economic perspective could be those big touch points between Israel and Morocco? So
I think, first of all, the difference between Morocco and the UAE from a tourism point of view was the UAE was closed to Israelis. No Israeli could come to the UAE. Morocco was still open to Israelis. I mean, you had to get a special visa and there was no direct flights, but Israelis still could go. So that's the difference, and that's why UAE became this wow and everybody's running there, because they couldn't do that beforehand. And Morocco was still, and it's exotic and different, but I think on the business side, I think that the UAE is level of business agreements and things that are happening between Israel and the UAE are at a very high level. They have a lot of technology, they have a lot of knowledge, and they're looking on a higher level, cybersecurity and fintech and health and all of these things to make collaborations. I think in Morocco, it's on a lower level. Like that technology is, I think, on a lower level, and they're looking a lot of stuff in agri-tech, in war tech, and in the basics, the basics that we have to offer, and we can offer them a lot. So I see a lot of collaborations happening with Morocco. It's just a matter of time. And I also am looking forward. I mean, we're talking about November. The border is opening for people from around the world to come into Israel, which is amazing news after a year and a half of them being closed. And we're looking forward to seeing Emiratis, Bahrainians, and Moroccans entering the country and touring our country and showing them the Muslim sites, the Jewish sites, the Christian sites, and just showing our lovely, beautiful country, because our country really is unique, as we all here agree and know. And I think it's a place that they would love to come to. And they've never been here before. Even though we could go to Morocco, the Moroccans couldn't come here. So this is like a new thing for them. And it's going to be, I think it will be, as my friends here said, Egypt and Jordan was a cold piece. We didn't see tourists from Jordan and Egypt. And even when we went to Jordan and Egypt, it was like always, and this is a warm piece. And this is a piece, as said before, of the people. And I see a lot of the people wanting to come to Israel and be part of Israel. People already want to buy houses here and want to, it's like this thing. We want to be part of it. We want to build these bridges and connections with this country and make them strong and warm. And it's a new era.
So I always tell our friends from Arise that investing in Israel is a good idea. Investing in the shekel is a good idea. Investing in Israeli real estate is impossible to lose money, basically, because the prices just keep on going up. And now if we're going to have people from Morocco, Bahrain, the UAE, and Egypt buying, this is the time to buy real estate in Israel. So that's a very interesting point.
I want to see people next year at the Arise Summit from the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain attending the summit, not only from around the world. I want it to be a mixture.
So let's work on that together.
Well, I went in on that one as well. We'll help, right? That's going to be
I'll
awesome.
bring the ones from the Emirates.
Exactly.
Coming back to you, Joel, you became famous back in the day because you wrote a book, if I'm not mistaken, about planes flying into buildings shortly before that actually happened. And so you had this eerily accurate way of viewing what's going to happen in the near future through the lenses of biblical prophecy, I understand. So what are you seeing? What are you seeing now for the next 5 years? We talked about where we've come since the Abraham Accords and where we are today. What's in our future, Joel?
Well, there's a
No pressure.
no pressure, right. If I really had that level of acumen, I would be a billionaire, because I would be. But I think there are trend lines that we can see. Yeah, I mean, yes, sometimes we can look at what the future is going to be because the Bible tells us. Right? Israel was going to become a sovereign country again, and Jews were coming back to the land. But for 1900 years, even most Christians didn't believe it, even Christian fathers of the faith. But it was true, and it was real, and it was literal. And now we're seeing it. So there are prophecies. But there are also you can just watch geopolitical, economic, and spiritual trend lines. And you project them out. Yes, there's going to be twists and turns, but so take an example. A couple of things that I think we're going to see is, I do think we're going to see an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Whether it's literally, I think every country is going to negotiate a little bit differently with Israel, and they may not formally think of themselves as an Abraham Accords country. Oman, for example, already has a warm relationship. When Prime Minister Netanyahu was Prime Minister, he made a public trip to Oman. It's a little country. It's a country that is a back channel to Iran. But they're a country that it would make sense, because UAE had never had an Israeli prime minister publicly visit. Maybe it happened, but we didn't know. Bahrain also never did that. So Oman is just an example of a country. A bunch of Iraqis, 300 prominent Iraqis, just called for peace with Israel and said Iraq should be part of this. Now, they had a lot of pushback, including from the government, who said they were going to arrest them. So maybe they're not ready yet. But the point is, other countries are watching. Now, the mother of all peace deals, Caleb, as I describe in the book, would be Saudi Arabia. Of course.
I thought you were going to say Iran, but okay.
Well, one day at a time.
Science fiction.
Mashiach will come
Right,
first.
even a novelist starts to go on. I make things up for a living. I'm not ready. Someday, yes. But look at what's going on. So in the book, I describe the fact that by God's mercies and maybe sense of humor, he opened the door for me to become the first Israeli citizen to publicly ever meet the leadership of Saudi Arabia. Like, had the Mossad chief done it? I'm sure that he had, right? But it wasn't public, right? And even Netanyahu, in December last year, made what, I describe in the book. It was secret at the time. I describe it in the book. He went to Saudi Arabia. He met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Mike Pompeo, and the Mossad chief was there. There wasn't a photo, but we all know it happened. Yeah. This is big. The flights that are going back and forth over Saudi territory, right? This is huge. So I'm not allowed to tell you the hours and hours and hours of conversation I had with Mohammed bin Salman on the topic of Israel. Almost everything else that we discussed was on the record, and it's in the book. And it's the first book ever. I mean, think about it, to have interviews with MBS. 2 Wall Street Journal reporters did an entire biography of him. They'd never met him, much less gotten him on the record. A New York Times reporter wrote a whole biography on him. Never met him. Well, because most people don't meet him. How did a Jewish evangelical Israeli get in that room? And I was told by the Crown Prince, you guys are the first Christian leaders in the 300 years that my family has controlled most of the peninsula have ever come. I told him, you could have thrown a dart out the window in the United States and hit one of the 60 million other evangelicals that aren't Jewish, that aren't a dual U.S. Israeli citizen, that don't have 2 sons that served in combat units in the Israeli Defense Forces, who isn't a prominent Zionist. I'm really honored that you chose me, but you didn't have to, but you did. Something is cooking, right? And if you look at the public things that are happening, they are trending in the right way. The Biden administration's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, went to Riyadh, met with Mohammed bin Salman, and said, what is it going to take for you all to make a decision to make peace with Israel? I asked that question. But what we seem to know from the reporting, if it's accurate, is that MBS did not tell Jake Sullivan, "You got to be kidding me. That's never going to happen." What he did apparently was give a list of things that the Saudis would need. Now, from some reporting, the list doesn't seem to be so much of what Israel has to do, but of what the Saudis want from the United States. Because the Biden administration has called the Saudis under MBS a pariah state, and has really put them in the doghouse, as it were. Pulled a Patriot missile battery out of Saudi Arabia when the Saudis are taking incoming Iranian-built missiles that are coming from the Houthi rebels and terrorists in Yemen. What is this telling us? It's telling us the Saudis are trending. They're trending, but they don't need to lead. There's a conversation going on inside the kingdom as every Saudi who thought 5 years ago, 2 years ago, peace was impossible with Israel and maybe not even desirable. Now they're saying, well, look what's going on with the UAE. Look, it didn't blow up the world. It's a good thing. And they're making money off of it. Exactly. And the Bahrainis and the Moroccans, the Sudanese, I think, are a different story right now. They got to figure out what they really want and need. All that to say, I think that we are looking at a U.S. brokered Saudi-Israeli peace deal in the next several years, I think. I think that the Iranian threat is driving this, and even if the Biden administration decides, you know what, we're not going there because of our issues that we have with the Saudis, I think that will drive the Israelis and the Saudis closer together faster, because the question for the Saudis is this, and I'll close with this point about this topic. They have to make a decision. Is this in their national interest? Right? I don't know what the Arabic word is for hasbara, public relations. But the Saudis cannot make this decision just to get the world and the Americans and the White House to like them a little bit more. But they have to have it really because this is their long-term interest. And clearly the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and Moroccans and others have said this is in our national interest. And therefore we can't wait for the Palestinian intransigence any longer because it's costing us things that we need. If the Saudis get there, and I think that's what they're weighing right now, if they get there, then they do get hasbara. They do get a huge benefit, certainly from the Christian community worldwide, and that's been praying for the peace of Jerusalem and is super excited about this wave of Arab-Israeli treaty. So that's where I would keep my eye. Who are the next countries that start saying, you know what, it's time? And I want to keep crisscrossing this region to
that's
follow
exciting.
the story.
That's exciting. Like I said, I can't wait to read your book.
Yeah.
Thank you for the amazing perspective on the geopolitical, this kind of macro level. I'd like to wrap up the session, turning back to you, Flo and Esti, and talk about the real change that's taking place in the life of women, business women, women leaders in the Middle East. If there's some exciting story, a story of hope, somebody that you met that that would exemplify the massive change. Most of our viewers are from countries that have had rights for women for many, many, many years and may not understand what this actually means for a woman in Bahrain today or Morocco or somewhere else. Do you have a story that you can share with us?
Well, I've always got stories, but I just wanted to sharpen on the point that Joel was just making, the geopolitical point, and add the business element to what he's saying. And that is this: when you want to look for trends, I mean, I didn't predict that the Twin Towers were going to happen like Joel here, but when you want to look at how something happened, you have to look at, the trends. 2 years ago, there were about 200 Israeli companies through third parties doing business in the UAE. So that was kind of what was to come. Today, there are companies doing business with Saudi Arabia, through Bahrain, through Oman, and through the UAE. And so if you want to look at the trend, reverse engineer the Abraham Accords and look at what's going on in Saudi Arabia today. And 2 nights ago, a flight landed from Saudi Arabia, a private plane, probably business. And so that's what we have to look at. Now, going back to the women's topic, of course, which is one of my favorite things, I think that women are natural peace builders and women are natural bridge builders. I'm not saying men aren't, but we kind of have our own language. You know, when you get women in a room, we find like this, something that unites us and a topic that we have in common. It's a very natural thing. When you look at the research, women who own businesses gain 15% more value than men to their businesses through networking. Why? We talk more. That's it. I'm sure you know that. You're both married. So I think that we have a very special role to play in a warm, sustainable peace. Not just as businesswomen and as leaders, political leaders, as mothers. Mothers are the center of the family. My biggest shock and surprise and, you know, pleasant surprise, I thought that the UAE and Bahrain were patriarchal societies. In fact, they're matriarchal societies.
Very interesting.
It's not openly a matriarchal society, but everybody's obsessed with their mothers there. It's like all the Jewish men that I know. It's like the mother decides who they marry, the mother decides
It sounds
where
like
they go.
Israel.
Yes.
It's the
like
line
country-
from My Big Fat Greek Wedding
Yes.
where the mom says,
Well,
you may be the head, but I'm the neck that turns your head.
I'm Sephardi, so I already knew that women were in charge. But when I went to the UAE, I realized that the mother is really the influence of the family. And so when you take the leaders and you take the business leaders and the political leaders and you see that 50% of the parliament of the UAE is women. We're not talking about a democracy, we're talking about appointments. 50% are women. You see 40% of ministers in the UAE are women. I wish these were the numbers in Israel. I really wish. I'm in local government, 20%. Knesset, 28%. We're not there yet, and they already are, so we have a lot to learn. Same in Bahrain, Morocco. Also, there's a very strong movement of strong women leaders, and I believe that our dual role as the center of the family and as leaders in our different fields, we will be determining this warm and sustainable peace.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love it because in Israel, we're used to talking about ourselves as the light to the Gentiles, right? And it seems like in the area of empowering women, and particularly in political leadership, the Gentiles can kind of be a light to us. And some of that love can spill over to ours.
we started off very well. I want to remind everybody, the Zionist movement was a real egalitarian movement in terms of men and women. In 1897, in the first Zionist Congress, women had the vote. Nowhere else in the world did women have the vote. We started off very well. We've kind of gotten stuck in
And
the
Golda
middle.
Meir, I mean,
Golda
that's a
Meir,
huge story,
and since-
but that's been a long time ago.
Yes, it is, and it's about time that we had another Golda Meir. And so hopefully, maybe we will also be helping usher in that era.
Yeah, well, maybe you are that golden man.
I don't know. I think I need my hair needs to go white first.
I think if we're talking about women, I think the highlight of some of my trips to the UAE in the past few years was meeting some amazing, amazing women there. And women not only from the UAE, by the way. I met some women from Syria who fought against Assad and against Assad's army and fled just with the clothing on them, who could not go back to Syria because of what's been going on there, and have become really big leaders in the UAE and are doing amazing things. And a woman from Saudi Arabia who did her doctorate on the women in Saudi Arabia. She went to all of these villages and interviewed women about the situation, women's situation in Saudi Arabia. And all these amazing women from countries that around the world that we could never meet here in Israel because they couldn't come here, that you meet there, and there they feel a freedom of speech. They feel that they can talk openly and freely about who they are and where they came from. And it's amazing and it's fascinating. I met with a princess from Sharjah, who's this fascinating woman who's married to Gaddafi's nephew. And a fascinating woman she has a modest fashion line of clothing, and she's doing amazing things. She also wrote a book, and you meet all these interesting women. And again, as Flair said, when women get together in the room, we connect like this. We don't need anything. We just have that chemistry, and we talk and talk and talk, and we always find connections. And you connect as a mother, you connect as a wife, you connect as a woman. And you can come up with these amazing stories, and you see that at the end of the day, we're all very much the same. We all have the same beliefs and the same hopes, and we all pray for the same things. And women are women, and we all want the same things. And women have that strength to be able to achieve and do things. We don't have the same ego and the same, things are done in a very different way with women, and we have that ability to get things done. and to really make sure things get done. And with the connections we have between women, it's, you know, the sky is the level. And I think for me, being part of the women's forum that Flair established, and being part of all of these women's groups of Palestinians, Israeli Arabs, and women from Egypt, Jordan, and around the GCC states, it's a privilege. It's a privilege, and it's amazing to talk to these women and understand from these women, and also learn from them. We have a lot to learn from each other, and to learn what they're going through, each one in their own story, in their own country, in their own times. But it's fascinating.
One quick addition to this is a story that I mentioned in the book, but I think it deserves in this context of your question. One of the trend lines that most people have not noticed about Saudi Arabia is that the Crown Prince appointed a woman for the first time ever to be the ambassador to the United States. Now, she has become a personal friend of my wife and myself, Princess Rima bint Bandar. She's the daughter of the most powerful Saudi ambassador ever to the United States, Prince Bandar. And she grew up effectively in the ambassador's residence in McLean, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. English as fuzz. She's a divorced woman, 2 grown children, fluent in English, colloquial English, learned diplomacy from her father. Her brother is the Saudi ambassador to London. This is a power player, and she's a women's rights activist, and she was a business leader. Now, behind the scenes, I'm not sure, I just don't know this yet. Is she ready quietly to meet folks like yourselves, maybe without a photo yet, in Washington, to build but things are happening, and what's unique, I think, about this moment, among other things, is how Christians are playing, evangelical Christians are playing, I don't want to overstate the role, but there's an intermediary role. Israel needs the Christian community who already loves them, but also loves peace. And it's just a unique set of things that, how am I building a relationship with a Saudi princess? Not alone. It's all, very, above board. And I bring other Christian leaders with me so that they can take that message back to their communities. Anyway, I think the point is Christians, Jews, and Muslims are beginning to do what we always wished we would do, and we were always told, no, religion is the problem. I think the reverse is true. I actually believe people who are more devout in their faith, you don't have to be devout in your faith in terms of being a peacemaker, but it turns out it's people that are lunatics who are lunatics and terrorists. It doesn't mean if you have deep faith that makes you a lunatic. That's a secular humanist conclusion. It's false, and actually you're seeing the reverse. You're seeing faith diplomacy at work.
Look at Huda Nuna.
Yeah,
She's the
exactly.
ambassador. She was the ambassador of Bahrain in Washington. She's a woman and she's a Jew.
I know.
And that was fascinating. And she's representing a Muslim country.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And she serves now on our advisory board for our 2 websites, All Arab News and All Israel News, which that's a fascinating story, which again, most people don't know because the media is doing a horrific job at covering even positive developments.
Absolutely.
And we've got to all do a better job. I'm grateful for what you're doing because we have to tell our own story. We have to step into the story, and then we have to tell it to like-minded friends who they just wouldn't know if they're going to have to wait for the New York Times or the Evening News to tell them. It's just not going to happen.
And I would definitely recommend All Israel News for people who want to stay up to date. I'm asked a lot of frequently asked questions. Well, what would you recommend as far as a good news source to understand what's happening in the Middle East? And I love the fact that you know the crowd that you're writing to. I know many of the people who track All Israel News are evangelical Christians and want to get news through the lens of somebody who at least understands their worldview, if not actually embraces the evangelical worldview. So more power to you. And we recommend All Israel News to our network. Your tribe. And as we've been speaking, thinking of biblical prophecy, it just seems like everything we're talking about is framed so well by Isaiah 60, which talks about arise and shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you, which is actually where we took the name Arise from. because it talks in Isaiah 60 several times, like 5 or 6 times, about Gentiles that'll come and build your walls, and their kings will build your gates, and they'll serve you, and so on and so forth. And it's all of you are dedicated to strengthening the connection between other nations and Israel, as like it says in Isaiah 60, the light of God is shining again on this nation. And it's a very exciting time. What a conversation filled with hope. And I'm walking away with more hope and gratefulness, really, for what's happening right now in the events in the Middle East. And thank you for participating with us today. And
It's an honor.
that
Yeah, it's
It
great
was
to be
our
with you
pleasure.
both.
It's great to
Yeah.
be with such amazing people, and I can't wait for it to be in person next year.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
to
I
meeting
know.
all of us again and having a conversation again about this, and discovering new and exciting things that are happening in the region.
May we do so sooner than later.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Thank you. Arise is an alliance of people around the world who cherish the Hebrew values of improving the quality of human life and protecting human life through business in a commercially viable way. In short, we believe in doing well by doing good. And I want to invite you today to join the Arise Alliance. Once you become a member of our alliance, you'll receive quarterly gift boxes with really cool gifts from Israel that you and your family are going to love. And it's a direct way of helping small Israeli businesses that are creating fantastic products. You're going to receive exclusive access to some really exciting content, including our Hebrew Word of the Month and also our featured Business of the Month, where I go into Israeli companies and interview some entrepreneurs and business leaders that are creating amazing technologies, tackling crises facing humanity and making life better. And this will expose you to some really exciting investment opportunities. You'll also receive free access to all of our events, including the Arise Quarterly Digital Summits, which are just fantastic networking opportunities where you can connect your business to other like-minded entrepreneurs. Let's discover together what is our part to play in Tikkun Olam as we're working together to fix this world. So make sure you're joined today. Welcome to the Arise Alliance.